Got everybody kind of making their way again. It was so good to see all those kids this morning running around, hearing them. It's always good. I know when Carson was just young, whoop, my microphone's off. When Carson was very little, he would cry and kind of disrupt, and we were always afraid of that. And our preacher, he said, I like to hear babies crying. And Brittany's like, well, hey, if you like to hear him, I'll bring him over one night and you can hear him cry. He said, well, what he meant was, obviously, it's good to hear babies crying in a church. If you don't, sometimes it kind of feels like a nursing home in a sense that it's not living, right? It's not alive, and we don't want it to get that way. Good to have all them young ones there this morning. All right, 1 Peter chapter 3. Thanks for sticking around. I told Brittany, I know she's got to go back there. She's to go back here and teach this morning, but I said, well, you're going to miss it, right? His wife submitting to the husband. And she said, well, I don't have to listen to you do what you tell me for that week. And she said, I'll miss it, right? I'll get something new on next Sunday or Wednesday night. So she said, I'll miss it. And obviously joking about that. But this is a good text. Now, again, don't run me out on a rail when we start talking through this, because I'm going to get to the husbands. We're not just talking about the wives. We will talk about the husbands and what they are to be doing with their wives and how they are to be acting. So wives, ladies, don't just bear with me. We're going to get there, and we'll get on ourselves as well. 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning there in verse 1. What we need to notice is that the chapter breaks, again, were given to us, that instead of rolling a scroll out and trying to find down where we would be at in reading, the chapters and the verse breaks help us in following along. And again, like today, if we want to go to a certain place in John, we don't have to try to read all through John to get there. We can go to the specific verse that we're looking for, but as well keeping it in context of what else is going on there. So though we've transitioned to another chapter, we haven't really changed our thought. We've been talking about submitting, going back there, as we'll note here in just a moment. So notice there in verse 1, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. So let's kind of examine some of this, look at some of these words. This likewise, again, brings us back in the same way. Some translations may have in the same way written out there. But that's what it's tying it back to verses 13 and 18. Notice, we're told through Peter, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king or as supreme. Then again in 18, servants be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the forward. Then likewise, wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. So we're still following this train of thought. Again, we don't cherry pick this one and say, look, this is all in the context. But notice here in that last bullet point, just as citizens must be in subjection to the higher governmental powers, so should a servant be submissive to the master, as the wife is submissive to her husband. So this is the way God has intended it. Now again, I have listened to some feminists speak about some of these things and kind of get into some of this stuff, but we're not here to, again, we're not looking at women as inferior. In fact, the fact that they have to submit shows that they aren't inferior. Okay, so if they could not, right, if they were inferior to man, then we could say, well, there's no reason for them to submit, but the wife must submit because she is equal with the man, or in that sense, right? She's not below the man in that sense. She's not equal, him being the head, but she is not below. She is not beneath. Brittany is not beneath me, right? But she is to be in subjection. Now, what does all that get into? The word subjection is subject to oneself, subordinate, or to obey. Now again, when we get into this isn't that Brittany goes and fixes my lunch and I've had my feet propped up and things like that. That's not what to obey or to be subordinate means. It is that as a man, as I make the decisions in the household, she is to be subject to me. Right? Now, when we used to teach the teenage boys and some of that stuff, I said, it's not like what you think it is, right? We understand, right, as men in here, you understand the responsibilities that you have provided for the household, the decisions that you have to make, the financial stability that you have to make sure, right, everything is placed upon your shoulders. And again, even the spiritual needs of your family, as we spoke about last month, the spiritual needs of your family are relying on the man. So the woman is to be in subjection in that sense, so the man really has a lot placed upon him. So the conversation that the woman is going to be having, again, by the conversation of the wives, that's their conduct, right? The way of life, the way you're going to be living. You're not a conversation like a talking point, but again, the way of life that the woman lives. So let's kind of look at this. Notice that the wife is to submit and the husband is to love. Now, Ephesians chapter 5, 22 through 25, and then 31 and 33. So again, look through this through first century lenses. We talked about the fact that there were servants and slaves in that area. Women did not have the rights that women have today. Women were thought about pretty much like property. Now again, that's just history. I can't change history. That's just the way it is. Like it or lump it, as they say. It's just history. So the fact that in those cultures that women did not have a very high position, the gospel doesn't really bind the woman. The Christian or the gospel kind of liberates the woman in the sense that the husband now is to love his wife. And we're going to see a little bit more about what the husband has to do in just a moment. But instead of placing Brittany down as a piece of property, right, and I can treat her the way I want to treat her, the gospel makes me elevate her to the position that she deserves. So instead of, again, we think of even the Middle East today, right? The ladies don't have very many rights, but this was really, this was in a sense good with this idea. But again, some people kind of, the idea of submitting, but just bear with me. Let's go through this. So, the wives are to submit, the husband is to love. And really, I've not been married long enough to give any kind of marital advice, but the woman wants love, men. I'll give you that. The woman, her love language is love. Ladies, the men want respect. Not that they could care less if you love them or not, but the man wants respect over love. And I think most men would agree with that. If a woman disrespected you and you said this is what we're going to do and she went against that, the man would rather say, well, I'd rather you respect me. But the woman wants love. So just kind of keep that in your thoughts as you go through your life with that. A little nugget there for you. Now notice, the phrase here at the end again, likewise ye wives be in subjection to your own husbands. All right, so the woman's place then is to be in subjection to her husband. But notice that if any obey not the word, so if any man, the husband is not obeying the word, the Bible, right, the scriptures, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wife. So what that means is that if the husband will not obey, right, you're talking to him about the scriptures, he's not obeying, he might be won over simply by your conduct, the way you live your life, by submitting, by listening to him, by respecting him, and not fighting against him. Sometimes we can see that men are won over that way. And again, kind of, it's not a fail-safe, right? And I know it's the other way around. Many men have helped their wives to obey the gospel, just the same as women are helping their husbands to obey the gospel. But sometimes it's your conduct. Sometimes it's the fact that you say, I'm going to services and I don't care if you're coming with me or not. You're standing up for those principles, right? Your manner of life. That sometimes can win the husband over. So that's kind of what Peter is talking about here, that they may not be, right? The preacher may come and talk to them and they may not want to listen, but the fact that you're, as wives, you're submitting, you're being a Christian, you're living your life in that way, that will help you to win your husband over. Now, let's look at verse 2 and keep all of this. We've only got 7 verses. I think I can get through it here this morning. While they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear. All right, so the husband, your wives, you're submitting to him, and he's observing, right, your chaste, right, everything that is pure and holy. He beholds your chaste conversation. Again, your conduct, that same. You can, if you write in your Bible, you can draw a line right up there between your conversation in verse 1 and your conversation in verse 2. Your manner of life, when you live your life pure and holy, right? He's watching that, and it's coupled, right, together with fear. So that idea of fear is respect that is due to officials. So again, it's not the Greek word phobios, the phobia that we get today, like what we're afraid of in that sense, but it's reverence, right? Fear, not fear of the husband in that sense, but respect, right? Respect that is due to officials. So this husband is observing you in your holy way of living, and that you're not only living holy, but you have respect, right? You're honoring and doing those things like that is needed done. So really, right, a lot on you wives in a sense. But you are to do this. Chaste conduct and reverential awe for the Almighty are a powerful combination, and it is. We have, and men, I think you would agree with me this morning, you would want a wife like that. That would be chaste, again, pure, holy, and that would show the proper reverence for the proper authority. And we said that's what we want, right? We want a woman like that. Many young girls would do good to hear a lesson about that, about being modest and chaste, and how that man wants that more. But maybe that's a lesson for another day. All right, let you get those notes for a little bit, and let's move on to verse 3. Again, we're trying to keep all this in context, so we don't want to get too bogged down with it. Verse 3, whose adorning, let it not be the outward adorning of plaiting the hair, or of wearing of gold, or of putting on of apparel. So let's kind of slow down right here and look at this adorning. That which serves to beautify through decoration or adornment. So he's saying, wives, again, keep it all in context, submit yourselves, and you never know if you're submitting yourselves and you're living your life the way you're supposed to, you may win your husband over, that he's going to behold your holy manner of living, right, your respect that you give. And then in verse 3, he says, your adorning, don't let it be on the outside, okay? You don't let your outside or your adorning be on the outside. Notice the plaiting, elaborately braided hair. So that's kind of what he's talking about here in just a moment when we get into this. So many may look at this and say, can this be taken literal then, right? Peter is saying that we should, for the wives to submit, right, and to be living holy and chaste, but they should not be adorning themselves in the outward appearance. What does that mean? All right, well, let's kind of look at it and follow through. If we took it literally, it would mean, well, you can't have braided hair. Now, there are people that look at this and view this and say, look, you can't, right? But we've got to keep it in context. Let's keep looking. They say no wearing of gold because that's what it says. But really, if you look at the context, then that means, one, we can't put on any clothes either. That just kicks everything in the head. Because when we're looking at that, look, he says, look in the context, whose adorning let it not be. All right, so don't let your wives, don't let your adorning be outwardly on the plaiting of the hair, the wearing of gold, or a putting on of apparel. So the man, the husband, wants the wife who's going to have this on the inside, and that's what we're going to see here in the next verse. Is it okay to wear braided hair? Yes. Is it okay to wear gold? Yes. Do we need to wear clothes? Obviously. So we say, all right, so we have to keep it all in context, and if we're going to hold fast to that, right, then we have to make sure, again, you can notice in 1 Timothy 2:9, speaks of the same principle. The principle is, you don't want, it's all right if your wife is ordained, right, if she's going out and she fixes herself up, there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with a wife doing that. But what's important is, instead of her being ordained ordinated on the outside, right, we need to be on the inside. And that's what you need to make sure that we're living your life like. That's going to speak more volume in the way you're living in the inward appearance. All right, so let's look at verse 4. But let it be the hidden man of the heart in that which is not corruptible, or even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. So when we're looking at this, again, the outward appearance of the woman is not what is so much important as the inward part, right? She must be ordained with a meek and quiet spirit. So that's important that we're observing that wives, right? Again, this is all in the context of submitting, being respectful, being holy, being in that sense that you have a meek, right? Not being overly impressed with the sense of one's self-importance, being gentle, humble, considerate, quiet, well-ordered. That's what we're looking for. That's what the wife is supposed to be doing, in a sense, right? She's to be living her life in that way. Again, I have no axe to grind against anyone, but probably many of us have probably had to confront a lady who was the opposite of that, right? Opposite of meek or quiet, and sometimes they're a little hard to handle in that sense. But nonetheless, that's what we say, all right, we want to be in subjection in that sense, okay? Not that you don't have a voice, ladies. Please don't leave here saying that. You don't have to just keep your mouth shut like, you can't say anything. But we see the inner part, right? We have a woman. I think of my grandmother quite a bit when I think about a Christian lady She was very meek. She was very quiet. Now, she'd stand her ground with my grandfather when she needed to, but she was very quiet and very meek in that sense. And look at the price. It's a great price. Ladies, if you're here and you do this, right, if that's the way you're ordaining yourselves, which is in the sight of God of great price, it's of great value and great worth, if this is the way you are conducting your life. Now, again, we probably have known ladies, young ladies, older ladies, conducting themselves in a way opposite of this, and maybe sometimes it kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth in the sense of her attitude and the way things are going. Well, we've known other ladies who fit these qualifications, right? And you can't beat them, right? You can't beat ladies like that, understanding all that they do, right, and the reverence and the kind of how they're conducting their lives. Again, I think of my grandmother quite a bit in through some of that. That idea real quickly, if we're kind of looking at that, in verse 4, but let it be the hidden man of the heart in that which is not corruptible. If you're reading the King James, that might be a little confusing to you, but like the ASV, it adds in the incorruptible apparel. So that's kind of that which is not corruptible in the idea of the apparel. So we don't want the corruptible apparel that's going to eventually, right, that inner part is not going to corrupt. So that's kind of the thought process here that Peter is given. All right, now verse 5. For after this manner in the old time the holy women also who trusted in God ordained themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands. So just that verse is pretty much easy to understand by itself. Here's the manner in which you should be living, wives. Here's some examples, or an example that we're going to give you, because the holy women of old time, this is how they conducted themselves, okay? Now look at this example. Even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, they're calling him Lord, whose daughters ye are, as long as ye do well, and are not afraid with any amazement. So, I can't help but think about Kerry Cruz, our preacher back home, said he was doing marriage counseling, and the man came in, he said, now show me that verse where Sarah called him Lord, Abraham Lord. And he said, bud, he said, we got a lot to talk about if that's the attitude going in. But notice what we're talking about here is the Lord here is not like that in a sense, but one is in a position of authority. And that is the man, right? The man has the authority. And Sarah obeyed, right? She was submissive to Abraham, again, and this idea of saying that he was her authority. So that's what we're kind of getting at. Husbands, don't demand your wives call you Lord. Go sit in my office. We can have some counseling, I guess, after that. If that's the case, don't do that. That's not what he's getting at. But Sarah, right, this Old Testament lady we hear about, she was this way, right? The example that she's given us in that she called him Lord, right? Showed him that reverence. Now notice that phrase, whose daughters ye are, one who has the characteristics of another being. So think of it like a child. So if you, wives, the ladies that are here this morning, if you follow that same line, you're almost like a daughter, right? You're showing those characteristics, even that Sarah obeyed Abraham and submissive to Abraham. You could be the same way. Now, this idea of being afraid, to be in an apprehensive state, so he's saying, as long as you do well and are not afraid with any amazement, so you're not afraid, you're not in an apprehensive state, and again, because the act of being intimidated or experience of being intimidated. So that's not the condition, right? You're not showing me saying I'm Lord in the sense because I'm bullying or anything like that, right? And you're not afraid with any amazement. So you're not in an apprehensive state by being intimidated or anything like that. All right. Now, sorry, ladies, but again, that's just what the Bible says. 6 verses going toward the way the wives are to submit. But again, we go back to even like Ephesians 5, 22 and following there, there's a role for the husband. So let's look at this, guys. We're not out of here without getting this. We've got plenty of time. All right, verse 7. Likewise, same way, right? In the same manner. Wives, you're submitting, or again, go back all the way to 13. We're submitting to the ordinances of man, the government. We're submitting servants to masters. Wives, you're submitting to husbands. In the same way, you husbands dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife, as unto the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. All right, men. Dwell with. Now again, this idea of dwelling with is tied in with living with someone. Live with. Don't have. That's again. I don't want to get into the stories, but I can't help but think about the preachers that said they talked to a husband and wife. They said, "We never fight." He said, "Y'all must live in different houses if you never fight." Right? So we got to live with each other in that sense. Men, live with your wives. But again, look through the lens of the first century. If a woman is property, and I tell her. Right? He says, no, you got to live with your wife. Notice this knowledge is comprehension or intellectual grasp of something. Now, this is important. Husbands. There are also responsibilities, again, restrictions imposed on the husband. Their life together is not to be a thoughtless or aimless existence, but one that is based on knowledge. So, husbands, you have to live with your wife and know your wife. Now, I know maybe you men might have wanted to say amen a few times, right? You need to listen. Before when we were talking about the wives, but the man has that responsibility. I need to know Brittany. I need to live with her in the sense that I know about her. We're not roommates, okay? We're not roommates. She's not my maid. She doesn't wash the dishes, do the clothes, do all those things for me and all that stuff. I'm living with her. I'm knowing her. I get to know her, and I'm going through that, and we're going to honor in just a moment. Now, the husband is to know his wife's emotional and physical needs. Now, this is important. He not only knows these matters, he is not indifferent toward them. And unfortunately, many marriages will fail because of the husband's ignorance and indifference. The husband is just there, right? He's there to provide. He expects these things, which is fine in a sense if the wife is being in subjection, but the wife needs that back, right? She needs that love back. So I'm supposed to know my wife. I'm supposed to know Brittany, and I'm supposed to know what she needs, okay? I've got to know her needs and know how to, not to get around like that, but in the sense that I can live together, right? As a husband, I can know Brittany enough that I can live together with her in that sense. So husbands, we have to be, sometimes men we're not as good about being open about those things, but we have to know what our wives' needs are. I know Brittany, like I said, if you were to take a survey, they've got those online. You can get those. But anyway, what do you need, right? Some of them are like, I need financial stability. Some of them are, I need companionship. Some of them are like, well, I need, I don't like doing the dishes, those kind of things, the help. I need help. And some of those things, right, those are the needs of the wife. And as a husband, right, if Brittany's complaining about doing the dishes and like, oh, I wish I had some help, right? And I just go sit in the living room, right? That's not going to be good. Hard to live in that kind of relationship like that. So I know the needs, right? And I'm helping in that sense, okay? So tall order as well, man. Notice that I am to honor Brittany. Manifestation of esteem, honor, reverence. Now again, in the first century, the wife was property, essentially, right? I didn't have to do all these things, but again, the gospel, you think, well, that's pretty rough, having to submit and to keep quiet and do what my husband's telling me to do. Well, but the husband elevates, the gospel elevates the wife in the sense that the husband is honoring the wife, right? He's giving honor unto the wife. I know Brittany's needs. I know what she needs, what I need to help her do for us to live together, and I'm honoring her, all right? I'm reverencing her in that sense of who she is. She is my wife. Now, again, very different from ancient customs in that time. They didn't have to give honor to the wife at all. They were the authority, right? They had the rule. Now, notice as well this idea of her being the weaker vessel. Now, the vessel is a human being exercising a function instrument. So this is a person, right? It's an instrument, one's own body, right? So she is the weaker body. Now, again, I'm not trying to get on any feminist toes and say things like that, but we have to understand it just is what it is. Women are typically weaker than men, and that's just the way it is. We want to think about, I know there's probably women that could whip me pretty good in a fight, and I'm not saying there isn't, but I'm just saying typically across the board, the woman is the weaker of the sexes, right? She's not inferior, she's just more frail in a sense, right? Like again, the man, the stamina, that's just the way it is, right? Again, like it or lump it, it's just the facts. So as I know my wife, and I understand that Brittany is the weaker vessel, right? I elevate her, I honor her, because she is the weaker vessel, into that position. So notice this as well, and this is a beautiful, again, I'm going to put a bow on it right here. We got 5 minutes. So I'm honoring Brittany. I'm reverencing her. I'm living with her. I understand her needs. I'm helping her through this. She's the weaker vessel, and I'm there to help and do those things. Look, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered, right? This is how I'm supposed to be living. This idea, if we're heirs together, right? Brittany and I are going to heaven. And if you're here this morning, right, I hope that's the relationship that you have, is you can say, all right, we're husband and wife, we're living our life, we're trying to go to heaven in that sense. And again, notice that's going to help us, right? Brittany being subject to me, but I elevating Brittany as well, and I'm helping her, and we're both trying to get to heaven in that sense that I'm not above her, she's not above me. But notice there, that they are to fulfill those roles so their prayers are not hindered. So if our relationship is rocky, right, if it's on rocky ground and we're living our life and I'm kind of having my way or the highway, and Brittany's not getting the help she needs, and I'm making decisions selfishly, and she's I'll say nagging, right? I don't know, but she's talking to me about what I need to be doing. that relationship is rocky. Right? That's not the way God intended for it to be. And what we find is that if that's the life we're living, right, kind of separated in the sense we're just roommates, well, then our relationship with God isn't very good as well. So we got to make sure that relationship is good. And that will help us as we are working on our relationship with God. So, again, I think that's all right. That's where we're at. So, wives, right? We want to try to be subject, right? And that's just the way the Bible says it. That you are, you're listening to your husband, you're listening to his authority and what he has to say. You're living your life in such a way. We can go back to Sarah and see how all those things were working towards that. And then husbands, but you gotta honor your wives, though, right? It's not about that. You lift her up, you help out. Now you help do the dishes, you help do that laundry. That's what we've got to do. All right, any questions or comments there on husbands and wives there in 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 through 7? That's from Ben chapter 2. That's right. That's what my grandpa, he'd quote, he'd say, yeah, I'm not going to give you book, chapter, and verse. For Miss Rhonda asked the verse about the washing the dishes. Sorry, I don't have book, chapter, and verse for that authority to say that. But what the point is, obviously, I know everybody's joking, but the husbands do want to honor their wives and help out like that. So, yeah, good comments. I figured, like I said, please don't run me out on the rail if you see something, I don't want to lose my job and things like that. All right, anybody got any other comments or questions? That's right. Very good, Miss Carolyn. Yes, for the men, having the boys, stepping on my toes now. Thank you, Miss Carolyn. But that's right. Miss Carolyn's 100% correct. And really, she does bring out a good point. We have two boys. Those men who are here who have boys. We need to make sure that we are living our lives, that Carson and Charlie understand what a real Christian man needs to act like. Women who have daughters, they need to understand, again, being chaste, being holy, being in subjection. They need those lessons taught as well. We have a generation growing up that is about the opposite of that, and we need help with that. So yeah, thank you, Miss Carolyn. Brittany but she's not in here to hear it. So the boys are, so I can get me on that one, I guess. But I'll try to do better myself with that. Anybody else? Very good points there.